Hello and welcome to the Haaretz Podcast. I'm Alison Kaplan-Summer in Tel Aviv. For now, the fragile Israel-Hamas ceasefire continues to hold, thanks to the substantial and unrelenting pressure from the Trump White House. But the war continues to weigh heavy on the minds of both Israelis and Jews around the world, and not only because the bodies of 13 slain Israeli hostages remain in Gaza. Joining me on the podcast today to discuss the war and its aftermath, and particularly its impact on European Jewry, is Rabbi Delphine Horvilleur. She is a prominent and transformational force in the French Jewish community. Delphine is the grandchild of Holocaust survivors, and she is only the third French woman rabbi ever. She currently serves as the leader of the liberal Jewish movement of France, in addition to leading her own congregation in Paris. Delphine is also a powerful cultural voice in France, editing the online journal of Jewish thought, Tnu'ah, and she is the author of 6 books, the latest of which is titled, How Isn't It Going? Conversations After October 7th. Our conversation about October 7th and much more is coming up. A special message for our listeners in the New York City area. Haaretz invites you to join us at the Other Israel Film Festival, taking place at the Marlene Meyerson JCC starting on November 6th. This year, Haaretz journalists will be hosting Q&A conversations with filmmakers, as well as taking part in a special panel on culture and freedom of the press in Israel. Haaretz readers and Haaretz Podcast listeners get 20% off of all festival tickets. If you'd like to join us there, go to the Other Israel website and use code Haaretz25. That's Haaretz and the number 25. For more information, please check the festival's websites, which we will link in the show notes. We hope to see you there. Rabbi Delphine Horvilleur, welcome to the podcast. It's an honor to have you.
Thank you so much.
The last time you appeared on this podcast, we were in May 2024, really intensely into the war. Tensions were high, huge demonstrations on the streets, anti-Semitic violence in France. The story I won't forget that you told me then was you watching a video of your son playing soccer with a huge Jewish star around his neck, Magen David, you suggesting to him that maybe he shouldn't wear it so prominently in those days, and him standing up to you and telling you, no way, Mom, I'm keeping it on. So my first question in catching up over the past year and a half is whether you think things have changed at all between now and then. Does your son still feel the same way that he did about wearing the necklace? Do you still have your nervous hesitations about him wearing it?
It's interesting because, I've been here, it was a year ago, more than a year ago, and I feel our notion of time has completely changed, So I don't know if we're so different from what we were a year ago, but what I know for sure is that we are so different from what we were 2 years ago. I mean, I see how much we are just different people. We changed in our personal lives. I feel I'm surrounded by so many crises. Of course, we know political crisis, economic crisis, socio-geographical crisis. But I feel more than everything else, we are going through a kind of linguistic crisis, that's how I would call it. We have an issue with words and language. We have a hard time talking to each other. I see that in so many different realms. I meet so many people in my work as a rabbi, in my congregation. So many people come to me and tell me, you know what? I cannot talk anymore with my parents, with my children. I stopped talking with my cousins, with my brothers. I deal a lot even also with couple crisis, people with a hard time for the past 2 years in the Jewish community to reconnect to their partner. I really feel it's a big issue. So actually, I don't know how to answer you. I feel I'm another person. I feel probably my son is another young man. He's still wearing his Magen David, and we're still having very interesting political and conversation, and also about the Jewish identity. I thought a lot in the past 2 years about a quote that says that we are mainly children of our times more and our generation more than we are children of our parents. And I often feel that my son belongs to his generation, and his political disagreements with him or religious disagreements have a lot to do with the hard time intergenerational conversation he's having right now.
And are you able to diagnose exactly what those changes are, or do you feel that's still something you're searching for, or a journey? Just speaking to yourself personally on exactly what is the difference between the Delphine that used to be before October 7th and the Delphine that you are today.
Well, what very often comes to my mind is the image of bridges. I feel that I've always been someone who tried to build bridges, to strengthen bridges with others. And I think one of the first effects or consequences of war, of any type of war, is that it destroys bridges. We fire bridges, we try to get them down, we actually want to get rid of bridges and of people who are trying to build them. Mm-hmm. And I felt in many ways it happened to me and to the people around me. Suddenly we are kind of unable to do what a bridge does, like to make a connection with the other's world. So it started with the empathy, a word we probably talked a lot about this notion in the past 2 years, I'm sure, here in your studio or everywhere. Like, people have a hard time being in empathy with the other. So sometimes the other is the other with a big O. You cannot find empathy for the enemy, and slowly this lack of empathy kind of contaminates everything in your life, because suddenly you lack empathy for your own tribe, for your neighbor, for the one in your own people who disagree with you. And slowly you lack empathy for the intimate, for the one who stands by your side. And it's a pity, and it's disastrous, actually, how we can't manage to put ourselves 1 second in the shoe of the other. Not necessarily to agree with him, but just 1 second to see from another point of view what is happening, like another interpretation.
Even if that's somebody who has hurt you very deeply.
Yeah. And it's also, what is striking for me is that for us Jews, it has been our absolute talent. I believe that the talent of interpretation, Jewish interpretation, which is the most sacred thing we do religiously, is an ability to step aside, an ability suddenly to look from another direction, to look at the world, or to look at the text, or to look at the word in another direction. And I believe that right now we are not good at that. We lost that ability. So this is what war does, I know. But right now, I think because we speak right now in a time of partially renewed hope. So this is really the time when we should figure out how we move back to a conversation.
Delphine, you were really in the eye of the storm this past spring, from what I've read. You wrote a column about the war in the journal that you edit. You wrote, quote, "I speak out of love for the country I love dearly, but also out of affliction in seeing Israel led astray into political disaster and moral bankruptcy, as well out of the suffering now endured by the people of Gaza." You really got hit by a backlash for those words. You were harshly attacked by the right-wing media in Israel. You received death threats, both France, in mainly. Israel and in France. I heard about a din rodef, right, which is a rabbinical ruling saying that you could be killed. And you wrote that you thought you were being too Zionist for some, not Zionist for others, and that you are caught in the crossfire. How did it feel? How does it feel now to have been attacked? Not only you're probably used to hostility, anti-Semitism in France, but this was, a lot of the fire this time was coming from inside your own tribe.
Well, it was a very weird experience, I have to admit. I was in Israel in May, and I spoke then with many hostages' families who convinced me I had to talk, that I couldn't be silent anymore. At the time, there were members of the Israeli government who said that hunger was a legitimate tool of war, that there were no innocent people in Gaza, and that bringing back the hostages was not the absolute priority. And after hearing these sentences, I felt, as a Jewish leader, as a rabbi, that I had to talk. And I talked through really the prism of Jewish tradition. I used the text, what I always do as a rabbi. And I used this quote that is very known, Ve'ahavta l'reacha kamocha, you should love your neighbor, your fellow Jews as yourself. And I just said that it's interesting that the quote before, the pasuk before, the verse that comes immediately before this famous one says, Ocheach tocheach et amitecha, you should be able to rebuke your neighbor and then you will love him or her as yourself. Like love in Judaism and in Jewish tradition is not unconditional. You have first to be able to announce criticism because of your love, because when you care about someone and you love someone, you have to be able to talk. And this is why I decided to speak, to talk. And I didn't expect, I was used to get attacked in France, especially from the extreme left, from pro-Palestinian crowds, anti-Zionist, for me being a Jew, actually, a Jewish leader. But I didn't expect that it would come so strongly from part of the Jewish community. And what struck me is that I got actually 3 kinds of criticism for what I said. The first type of criticism were people who told me, what you say is wrong. What you say never happened. You're lying. So a category of people that stand in a state of denial, which I totally understand because denial is a very natural human, reflex. You want to protect yourself, so you pretend it doesn't exist. So I could understand people who attacked me saying, no, what you say is wrong, it never happened. Then part of the people who attacked me, a second category, told me, well, actually what you say is happening, but you shouldn't say it. Because, you shouldn't expose any dibat haaretz, as we say in Hebrew. You shouldn't expose anything that gives weapons to our enemy. You should wash, it's the famous sentence, you should wash your dirty laundry in the family in private, which is nonsense. Right now people have access to what is happening. Actually, I believe precisely the opposite. I believe that the health of a society and of a group, including of the Jewish community, depends on our ability to disagree and to expose our disagreement in a very healthy way. But then there was a third category of people who told me, you know what, maybe what you say, it's not that it's not happening, it's not that you shouldn't expose it, but it's okay that we behave like that, that they were like this moral notion that maybe actually I'm too much into old moral diasporic culture. And maybe war is about doing to the other what it did to you along history. So for me, it was really striking to get those 3 kinds of answers. To be totally honest, I got much more support, including from Jews in France, than I got attacks. But the attacks were really, really harsh, including death threats and hate mails. And also another thing that struck me in this period is that many, many people, and until today it happens in Paris, I walk in the street and people stop me, Jews stop me, and they say, thank you for talking, because we exactly believe what you said, but we cannot say it anymore. So there's this idea that somehow the crisis and the war and the pain and the trauma created, again, our inability to talk. And again, I insist, I understand totally what trauma creates and pain creates in our life, in our psychic world, in our mind. But I believe that the real threat today is when we are not able to say what we think, to talk, and to re-engage again in this Jewish conversation.
That's why you rabbis are helpful. Often you are willing and able to say in public what many Jews are thinking in private and not daring enough to say in public. You had an interesting article about deciding what you were going to say in your Rosh Hashanah sermon this year, right? Part of what you wrote was about what you were going to say and what you should say and what you couldn't say. How did your Rosh Hashanah sermon turn out? It ended up being like on the brink of the ceasefire of the war, but where did you fall in the end about addressing politics or not addressing politics on Rosh Hashanah?
I said exactly that to my congregation. I told them on Rosh Hashanah that on the day of Rosh Hashanah, I got many mails from congregants who told me, please don't speak about politics. As many mails, even more messages from congregants who told me, don't you dare not talking about politics. So here I was stuck. So I told them, you know what? My sermon is going to pretend I'm not talking about politics. And I simply taught what rabbis have always taught, which is the text we read on Rosh Hashanah. And guess what? What do we read on Rosh Hashanah? On the very first day of the Jewish year, instead of reading a story about Jewish identity, about the creation of the world, about ourselves, we read the story of Hagar, which in Hebrew reads Hagar, the stranger. The rabbi's idea is that on the very sacred day for the Jewish people, we should be concerned with our relationship with the other with a big O, Hagar and Ishmael. And I don't see how you can not talk politics while you're reading this text. And then 10 days later came Yom Kippur. And on Yom Kippur, I decided to do something that I know for some people in my congregation was very daring and maybe bothering. On Kol Nidre, on the evening of Yom Kippur, I invited an Israeli Jew and a Palestinian to come to services, and I invited them to read a prayer in Hebrew and in Arabic during services. So we stopped Kol Nidre service at some point. I invited these two women, and they read. We built a kind of bread of languages between French, Hebrew, and Arabic. We read the prayer of mothers for the safety of children, and it was an incredible, incredible moment. I noticed that very few people, some people left the room at that point, but all the others had tears in their eyes and then thanked me for, enabling these languages to dialogue in this sacred moment.
Speaking about talking about politics, one of the things that you've spoken out about back in March was the invitation extended by Israel's government, by our Minister of the Diaspora, Amichai Chikli, to very far-right leaders from France, including other far-right European leaders, to a conference combating anti-Semitism. I want to ask what you make of Chikli's affinity for the far-right in Europe, really for the international far-right, and its implications for European Jews. The reason this happened in March, but it's relevant because there's been a backlash here over his invitation to Tommy Robinson in the UK. He invited him to Israel for a VIP visit, and the committee in the Knesset that deals with the diaspora has officially rebuked him and asked him to apologize for inviting Robinson here. So you saw this from the perspective of the anti-Semitism conference and the invitation for France, and I want to hear from you as a European Jew what it means, some of this, extreme warm outreach to the furthest of right-wing elements in Europe from Israeli leaders.
Well, I have to admit that for me, it's really unbearable, this situation. I feel that European Jews, like me, for years have been leading a very difficult struggle, a struggle where we need simultaneously to fight multiple wars. We have this struggle against both extremes that are becoming stronger almost in every European country. We struggle against the extreme left and the way anti-Semitic discourse stepped into the extreme left through, of course, the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. And we struggle, as we've been struggling for years, against the extreme rights that very often make use of Jews to build and strengthen other hates. And we have to be very clairvoyant, lucid. We have to be really clear in our vision that we need to fight simultaneously, those two fights against both extremism. And it feels sometimes that, the Israeli politicians in that matter are actually fighting against diaspora Jews.
Ironically,
interests.
the minister for the diaspora is spearheading this, yes.
But, I think it's interesting that sometimes today it feels that Israeli interests and diaspora Jews' interests are in conflict, in struggle. Actually, it's not only true coming from the right. Sometimes I feel the same thing when I hear, for example, Israeli leftist activists who expect diaspora Jews to be super, super, super critical of Israel. I feel there is sometimes this disconnection that Jews in France are aware that they need to find a weird path where simultaneously they support Israel and they can criticize its government. And sometimes it's very difficult to find. It's like really an exercise of equilibrium. You walk on a very thin line when you need to be both supportive and critical. It's something that is very critical for me as a rabbi, because in my leadership as a rabbi, in my task and my work as a rabbi, I constantly wonder with my own people how I can, in the same time, open my arms to bring them comfort, because they need to be comforted. Objectively, they do need to be comforted. But at the same time, as you give what we call in Hebrew nechama, consolation, at the same time, you need to bring them a mirror, like be able to look at themselves in the mirror and to wonder what we could have done differently. And I feel that the exercise is very often Israel, if I say this way, Israeli politicians really don't help us in this endeavor.
One of the things that happened since your last appearance on the podcast is the fact that your book about the war, How Isn't It Going? Conversations After October 7th, became available both in Hebrew and in English, so podcast listeners could actually read it. Can you talk a little bit about it? It's not a straightforward memoir of your war experience. Its format is a little bit experimental, which I guess, writing in French, the tradition of French literature is, fits. It's a series of imaginary conversations that you have. Can you tell me about the choice to structure it that way and about the theme, which, you also have hit on in this interview about how October 7th uncovered many aspects of historic trauma that perhaps we weren't aware of before?
Yeah. Well, after October 7th, the book was born quite fast, actually, from my sleepless nights. I just couldn't sleep at night. So I started to write night after night. And I realized, without even choosing it, that each time I wrote something, it became a conversation. So, for example, one chapter is an imaginary conversation with my grandparents, deceased grandparents. One chapter is about a conversation I had with my children, a very real conversation. One conversation is about my relationship to Zionism, or a conversation with my Arab friends, or with the left parties in France. So each chapter became a conversation that was a difficult one for me. And I realized very fast that the book was haunted with ghosts. For example, the chapter about my grandparents, I realized that many people around me, and maybe it's even your case, after October 7th, had in their mind an ongoing conversation with past generations, with the deceased, with messages that were said through words or sometimes silently were transmitted to them through the weight of Jewish history. And for example, in my case, I kept hearing my grandmother's voice. My grandmother was a survivor of Auschwitz. She never talked about what happened to her. She was one of those very silent survivors who kept her secrets. But her voice resonated so strongly. And I kept hearing her with her Yiddish accent telling me, you see, it's happening again. And I started noticing, I know it sounds maybe weird, that in our everyday conversations with friends or people I met, there were many, many ghosts around us. We were never talking alone because each one was bringing past traumas, heritage that were part of the conversation. And you know what, even today, very often when I speak with someone about, let's say, the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, very often when we disagree, I stop the conversation and I say, let's identify which ghosts are in the room. And generally I say to the person, for example, right now for me, when I speak about Israel, there are two major ghosts. One is the fact that I'm the grandchild of an Holocaust survivor. And another ghost is the fact that I was on that place in Tel Aviv exactly 30 years ago when Rabin was assassinated. And the dreams and the hopes of Oslo follow me pretty much everywhere, and they haunt me each time I'm talking about this topic. And generally, I invite the person in the conversation to say, okay, what are your ghosts? When you're talking about this topic, what do you bring forth? So the book is basically an acknowledgement of all those ghosts and difficulties and conversation stoppers. And it led me also to explore, difficult topics like my relationship to Israel and to Zionism.
I like the title, How Isn't It Going? Because the hardest question to answer for the past 2 years in Israel has been, how are you? How's it going? What's going on? How isn't it going is a take on that?
Yeah, I think it's also a take on many jokes, and Jewish humor always plays on this notion. I know there's a joke, I don't know if I'm able to tell that joke in English, of two people who haven't met for years and they see suddenly each other, two Jews in the streets of Manhattan, and one is asking the other, how are you doing? And the other says, it's fine. And so the guy says, but tell me more, maybe in 2 words, how are you doing? And the other says, in 2 words, not fine. And I guess this is exactly what we went through. If you were in the past 2 years to ask me, if we meet in the street, how are you doing? I would probably say fine and really not fine. Like my life is going on, but at the same time, something stopped. And this is what trauma creates in our life. Time stops.
On a more fun note, since our last conversation, you have been transformed into something of a pop culture icon. A French television series that was picked up by HBO Max internationally is called Reformed in English. It's based on your life and on your book on what it's like to be a pioneer Jewish female rabbi in France. I believe you're the third ever, right? What do you think of the show? What kind of reaction have you gotten? Do you feel better understood since the series?
So it was a very funny experience, actually. I didn't expect it would become a show. The book that I wrote years ago is called Living Without Dead. And it's a story of how I work with the families that I accompany. And they decided to adapt the book into a series that is both based but really, really far away and unfaithful to the book. So they created this character of a female rabbi who is a little bit like me, but
she
really
has curly
not.
hair too.
She has curly hair, but she's really not like me in the way. I mean, a lot of people who watch the show are convinced that she's me. So very often people ask me, "Is your dad a psychoanalyst? Do you have this issue?" The way she is in the series, when actually it's really not me. But I think they managed to keep a certain spirit of how I envision the rabbinate, what it means for me to accompany people, what is, according to me, this pastoral duty in my work. And I think it's quite a good, intelligent and funny series. Very French, actually, also. I think it says a lot about the French society, in a way. And I really, really enjoyed it. It's a very nice experience.
Delphine, once again, France appears to be in political turmoil. Sometimes, as an Israeli, it's nice to see that we're not the only country that continues to be on the brink of new elections all the time. The far right is pushing for new elections. It's currently not legal for the leader of the far right, for Marine Le Pen, to run. We've seen from pundits now that Macron is looking for his legacy to be his Middle East peacemaker role, that he inspired Donald Trump with his recognition of a Palestinian state and his peace plan for it. I'm wondering just what is the political atmosphere like specifically for your community, for the French Jewish community? Are they still so focused on the war and what's going on in Israel that they're not unsettled by what's happening there, or is it affecting them?
Well, I think the key word is probably loneliness, a certain loneliness. I feel that French Jews have experienced that loneliness for quite a long time now. It started probably 25 years ago when anti-Semitism was already on the rise in France. They were, like, we have all in mind these attacks to 2006. Ilan Halimi is abducted and kidnapped and tortured and killed. It was in 2006, 2012, Toulouse. Terror attacks against children in a Jewish school. Then 2015, the Hyper Cacher terror attacks. And again, I feel, and especially for the past 2 years, many French Jews have experienced a feeling, objective and subjective, of being very lonely that actually they don't know anymore exactly who stands by their side, who are their allies, which is a huge, actually, historical change in the condition of French Jews. Since the Dreyfus Affair, for French Jews, what's pretty clear, it was pretty clear who were the allies. Basically the left side of the political realm was the Jewish allied with the Jews, and everything changed. And right now you feel in the Jewish community that people are looking for friends, who are our friends, who support us, who give us confidence, and it's an issue, it's a problem, because it happens in France the way it happens in many other places in the world. Some members of the Jewish community suddenly believe or tend to believe that the extreme right might protect them, might be a new
because
ally.
They have a common enemy in quotation marks, right?
And I think it's a huge mistake to build on this illusion. I understand how people get there, but I think it's really a real threat to surrender to this illusion. So this is where the fight becomes difficult.
I think last time you were on the podcast, we discussed how North American Jewry seemed to be now transforming into something more resembling the way that European Jewry and French Jewry feel. I'm very sensitive to it. The community I live in Israel is a popular destination for French immigration, so I feel like I'm able to gauge the mood of the French Jewish community as to how many newcomers we have here in Israel coming from France, whether or not moving to Israel Aliyah seems like something that they have to do in order to protect themselves. And then when they feel more secure, then that rate goes down.
It's very difficult to know what are exactly the numbers of French immigration to Israel. What I know is that I don't know anymore of any Jewish family in France who didn't have that conversation around the table, wondering where will we be in a few years. In my congregation, people intend to stay. They feel very French, very connected to France, and they intend to stay. But I think the conversation has happened around every Jewish Shabbat table for the past years. What about the next generation? Will we be there? Will we move? Israel, America, other places. But you're right. I remember we talked about it a year ago when I used to live in New York during my rabbinic studies. So many times I heard from my American Jewish friends when we were talking about anti-Semitism in Europe. They would tell me, it would never happen here. No chance it would happen here. And very often now I tell them, well, you see, history is full of surprises, bad surprises. None of us right now knows where we're going. And it should create, I think, humbly, with a lot of humility, a particular solidarity, with each other. We lack certainties right now. We have to live with those doubts.
Rabbi Delphine, I think I'm going to base my final question on the title of your book. Since the ceasefire, since the release of all the living hostages and the continued return of the killed hostages slowly to Israel, do you feel like you can be asked, how's it going? How is it going? Is it going for you? What's your response to that question today?
Well, I feel I'm able to give, depending on the hour of the day, almost a different answer. I often think of the word in Hebrew, tikva, hope. This word tikva actually means originally a rope that you send to someone who stands at the bottom of a hole, of a bore. And I do feel indeed that we are all standing right now at the bottom of a very deep hole. And we desperately need to see and to feel this rope that is sent to us.
And be able to reach it.
To reach it. And maybe, just like when you get up on a rope, you very often need each other. It's very, very hard to climb alone. But the question is, again, are we able to listen to each other? Maybe, I say a word about the fact that I'm here in Israel to take part in this week in a conference organized by the French Institute. And the name of the conference is Et Ledaber in Hebrew, which means it's a time to talk, it's time to speak. But obviously, many people know that this quote is from the Bible. It comes from Ecclesiastes, Kohelet. In this very famous chapter, Kohelet says there is a time to mourn, and there's a time to laugh. There's a time there's a time to speak, and there's a time to be silent. And I think we actually right now experience that it's not true. It's really not true. We have to do all these things at the same time. We have to cry, and we have to laugh, and we have to make war, and we have to love, and we have to be sometimes in despair, and we have to build hope. And it's a weird human experience to go through this, to know that we have to learn simultaneously to feel and to do all those things.
Rabbi Delphine Horvilleur, it's always a pleasure and an inspiration to have you on the podcast. Thank you so much for coming, and please come back.
Thank you so much.
And that's it for this episode of the Haaretz Podcast. Thanks to my guest, Rabbi Delphine Horvilleur, and to producer and editor Nara Malkin. If you'd like to continue to listen to the podcast, make sure you never miss an episode. Please subscribe to us on Apple, on Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. And if you're so inclined, leave us a 5-star rating and more people can find us that way. And to keep up with all of the latest news on Israel, the Middle East, and the Jewish world, do not forget to subscribe to and follow Haaretz.com. I'm Alison Kaplan-Summer, and until next time, shalom from Tel Aviv.